2 o'clock, I think we should start. Welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the Greater Cambridge Partnership Joint Assembly. We've got some apologies. Could I hear who from, please?
Thank you, Chair. There are apologies from Councillor Alex Beckett, Karen Kennedy and Heather Richards.
Thank you. Those are all members of the Assembly. Also, just to note what might appear different, Rachel Stopar, the Chief Executive, is on annual leave at the moment and is being represented in this meeting by Niamh Matthews, who's sitting on my right. Okay, that was item number 1 on the agenda, already done. And the second item is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest on any item on the agenda? See none, so if anyone thinks again about that, they can identify the particular item. Third item, minutes of the previous meeting. I haven't been told of any issues in relation to that. Are there any? Okay, may I sign the minutes as a correct record? Thank you. We're going through this swimmingly so far. Then we come to item 4, questions from members of the public. And I want to report that there are 3 public questions. They all relate to item 6 on the greenways. And we're going to deal with them when we come to that item, and I'll explain how in just a minute. Item 5 is petitions. No petitions have been submitted to this meeting. Get to item 6, which is the Greater Cambridge Greenways. So let me explain how I propose to organise this item, because there's quite a lot of information in the reports we've got. I'm going to first highlight in the report what it is that the Assembly is being asked to comment on, and you can see that. I'll just refer to the section. It's on page 24, section 1.7. There are a list of yeah, they aren't A to G in the report, but just bullet points. But okay, so the various bullet points in section 1.7. So that's the focus of what the board will be considering when it gets to meet in a couple of weeks' time. I'm proposing to structure the discussion as follows. I'm going to ask the officers to present successively in turn each greenway. So first Barton, then Horningsea, then Melbourne, then Sawston. And in between each of those, we have our discussion on those particular greenways to make sure that we don't miss any points that people have of a sort of detailed nature. And then, as appropriate, we will talk about any general issues or common issues at the end of that sequence, which the officers will obviously help us with. I will also deal with the questions and the contributions from members of partner bodies in that way too. So we have public questions from the Milton Cycling Campaign, which will be asked by Roxanne de Beau, and we will take that question along with our discussion on the Horningsea Greenway. Then there is a question from CamCycle, which will also be asked by Roxanne de Beau. We will take that in the context of the general debate at the end of the sequence. And then there is a question from Linda Worth on behalf of the Cambridge British Horse Society, and we'll take that ahead of the general discussion at the end as well. Now, I mentioned that we had a couple of contributions from members of partner bodies, so that is 2 members of the County Council, Councillor Susan van der Ven, and her contribution we'll take in relation to the Melbourne Greenway discussion, and Councillor Brian Milnes, who obviously was a member of the Assembly until recently, we will take his contribution in the context of the Sawston Greenway discussion. So hopefully everyone can see where their point is going to be relevant in that structure. And I think I will first ask Peter Blake to launch us on that.
Chair, I'll endeavour to launch briefly because I know the members want to speak at length on this. This is the second in a series of Greenway reports. Next couple of Assembly meetings, we will take the rest of them. There are no final decisions in this report. The report feeds back on the engagement process that this Assembly wanted us to embark upon in terms of updating members of communities, engage and take forward the detailed design. So a programme of engagement has been undertaken for these greenways, October, November, December, and actually we're out with the next phase already. Member briefings in advance, workshops with non-motorised user groups, including key stakeholders, and then a series of public events along with the engagement responses. That's the focus of today's report. The idea, and the chair has referenced the key elements in paragraph 1.7 of the elements that will go to the executive report, that really focuses on what did the public tell us, what was the outcome of that engagement, an update in terms of the business case, and as I explained last time, it's not the final business case. We'll undertake the final business case slightly differently because whilst we're obliged to do that in terms of our governance, we'll do one business case for the entire Greenways network. What we've tried to do through this process to help with the articulation is to do them individually at the moment, and we had that conversation last time. It will focus on what work around planning and consent we need to be getting on with now, so whether that's planning applications, whether that's access to land, whether that's traffic regulation orders around speed limits, so it will focus on that. And then it outlines programme of work, taken in 2023, and again, as I said last time, I expect more work to be pulled into 2023 than the key next steps of this, and this is something, Chair, that the Assembly may want to reflect on, is continued engagement with this Assembly, with local members and with key stakeholders as we continue to finalise the designs of these schemes. We recognise there's a lot of interest, we recognise that there are differences of opinion that we're attempting to manage, and that will be a key element going forward in terms of how we take that forward. So again, if the Assembly has got views on that. I'm going to stop there, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. I think we should go straight on then with the presentation or any introduction to the Barton Greenway, which is the first in sequence.
So again, I wasn't proposing to go through these in detail, other than the format of the report reflects the feedback that we had from the Assembly previously. Tell us what the public said that you're going to change, and tell us what they said that you're not going to change, and the reasons why. And that's what the report endeavours to do. So for each section, Barton 2.4, 2.5, and then as we move through 2.6, 2.7, outlines the areas following feedback that we propose to change, update the designs, and areas that we don't. And again, obviously welcome Assembly's views on that, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So are there any comments or contributions on the Barton Greenway? See you so far, so go ahead, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I've had a look at the Barton plans or proposals in quite some detail. I've also ridden the route, which I found is really the only way to understand what's proposed versus what's already there. And I've also looked at the business case. And I suppose one of the disappointments for me really is that there's only a 20% uplift in usage of the greenway compared with its current usage. And I hope we'd be aiming for something a bit higher than that. There are some things that I would say I've seen and I think are very welcome. So the improvements of the Barton New Road junction and the signalisation of that, I think, are very welcome. The widening of the extremely narrow path on the M11 bridge is very welcome. There's signalisation of the crossings of the Haggis Road farm roundabout and the slip road as well, which I think are also welcome. They're not as ambitious as maybe was proposed in 2019. And I think, one thing I'd hope to see is that the two-stage crossing at the Haggis Farm roundabout was a single stage. One thing that's very frustrating is a lot of signalised crossings are set up in such a way that you end up waiting a long time to cross. And I think it would be, I'd like to see more priority for the non-motorised users at these crossings. Especially when the road's busy, the traffic sensors will just keep you waiting for a very long time. So if we can kind of simplify those and prioritise those, that would be excellent. I know there were some comments about that in the feedback, but the response to the feedback was, we'll talk to County Council Highways colleagues about that. So I'm kind of making the point that I think a lot of people would like to see kind of improvements in the prioritisation there. The other real major point I wanted to make was around the section between, as you just come out of Cambridge to Barton, that path, a lot of it is right next to the carriageway. There is no segregation from the carriageway. And there are many kind of instances of, for example, the A10 path that's just been built north between Waterbeach and Milton. It is right next to the carriageway, and it is quite unpleasant when there are heavy goods vehicles, traffic, travelling at sometimes the speed limit, sometimes over the speed limit. And I appreciate that there are difficulties with constraints in the highway's boundary that have to be dealt with. But given that the proposals are suggesting reduced speed limits, I think at the same time, why not take the opportunity to narrow the carriageway so that actually the speeds are reduced? People drive more slowly because the carriageway is narrower. Then that provides an opportunity for segregation and separation between the path and the carriageway. And I'll make this point again when it comes back to the Horningsea Greenway. But those sorts of layouts are something that I think are extremely off-putting to anyone but the most confident cyclists. So I think those are most of the points I've got. I think it's really a question for. I suppose my question for the officers is around the 20% increase in current cycling usage rates of these paths and whether we can increase them further.
And the detailed points that you made.
And the detailed points,
if
you would like to respond on those as well, that would be fine, yes.
And the narrowing of the carriageway.
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other comments on the Barton Greenway? Claire Daunton, sorry, I should say.
Yeah, thank you. It's really a point of detail, just a point of clarification under 2.4, the Grange Road section. And the comments, the responses state that the petition has been received regarding the Grange Road crossing. And in action taken, it's not clear whether the action taken responds directly to the concerns raised in the petition or not. So I could just have some clarification on that. Thanks.
You? Any other questions? The other Claire Ruskin.
Just a general point, this is an easier to read report, so thank you for that. It was quite easy to see the changes suggested and the feedback, so that was an improvement. Thank you.
So I'll take those three and put them to Peter.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of Paul's questions, that's exactly why we need the ongoing discussions with local members. I entirely agree about the roundabout. That's not necessarily easy to deliver. But there's no point being sat there, it puts people off. So we are taking that away and the Barton Road, and I'm sure when we liaise further, we'll be picking these things up. The 20% uplift relates to standard Department for Transport guidance. We're obliged to follow their requirements in terms of the business case. And so that's what the magic solution comes out with. Yeah, that's not necessarily, forget necessarily, that's not our go-get. Hello? Should I do a closer?
I think there's an audibility
Full
problem.
flow then. Sorry. So in terms of, WebTab guidance, you go through the guidance and it churns out a number. That's not necessarily the target that we're going for. Clearly, we want as many people to use this as possible, which is why we want to make sure we deliver the best possible network we can. We know we're going to deliver to LTM 120 requirements, which is going to be my answer to Roxanne, so there's an early warning on my answer. But we need to make sure that we maximise the potential on this. That's where the number comes from. That's not necessarily our figure. I should have introduced the team, Claire, because there's people here and there's people at the back who do all the hard work rather than me. One of them knows the answer on Grange Road. And if not, we'll get you an answer.
Hello everyone, I'm Lisa Bloomer, I'm one of the project managers at GCP. I think the short answer is yes, it does. I personally have met with the resident that started the petition, so I've heard their concerns firsthand. So our response to that is all about safety at that crossing and visibility, particularly for pedestrians using that crossing. So our next stage of design will respond directly to those concerns, and we've also liaising with our colleagues at County in the signals team in particular to feed back on the sort of reportings from the petition. So yes, we are responding directly to those.
Thank you. Did you finish, Peter? Okay. I suppose just to press you a little bit more on the 20% figure. So are you saying that for this stage of drafting out a business case, which isn't, as you said, final, 20% is the magic number that needs to be there, but that will be refined in the eventual business case?
One of the things we talked about last time was we are required under our governance with government for our major investments to go through the business case process. But it doesn't necessarily fit schemes like Greenways, right? Which is why at the moment we've produced business cases for each of the Greenways, but actually it makes far more sense to do it as an amalgam, because broadly the major scheme assessments are for bigger schemes. So if you know, on just shy of £80 million on Greenways, and in business case terms, it will make more sense in terms of the output. I think there's still more work to do in terms of what those projected numbers will be, and that's something we'll continue to do. But I wouldn't want to get dragged down a Department for Transport WebTab compliant system answer says, because sometimes the doesn't make a lot of sense to people who want to use the network and get the best of it. And we've got to make sure that we meet our governance requirements, but actually we also make sense of what we deliver. Is that helpful, Chair?
Thank you, Peter. Paul would like to come back.
Yeah, no, thank you for that clarification, Peter. That's good. I suppose what then that leads to the question: what are we aiming for? You know, what's our goal in terms of that mode shift, or at least uplift in usage?
Which is an interesting question because we haven't set one for the Greenways. We've said that the Greenways sit as part of our wider strategy. Our wider strategy seeks a reduction of 15%, which we know that requires significant increase in walking, cycling and public transport use. But we've not set one particularly for Greenways because we know we will go through the WebTag process. That might be something that I'm talking myself into having to reflect on, and then because I took a number of items last time, program-wide items that we promised we will come back to once we've gone through this engagement session. I'll maybe take that and add that to the list. And we'll provide an answer to that one as well, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. I think you're right, that probably does then become an action, doesn't it, from this? But, are there any other contributions on the Barton Greenway? Okay, so let's move on to the next one, which was the Horningsea Greenway. And as a preface to that, I want to ask Roxanne Debeau to come forward to ask her question on behalf of the Milton Cycling Campaign. But you need to find somewhere to sit, of course, yes. Go ahead, Roxanne.
Hi, sorry, am I asking for Milton Cycling Campaign first? Is that correct?
Sorry?
Is this for Milton Cycling Campaign?
Exactly, yes.
Got a bit lost in all of that. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. I'm here today to ask a question on behalf of Milton Cycling Campaign. Milton Cycling Campaign is very disappointed with the Greenway proposal for Horningsea. This proposal lacks ambition, in particular the following areas. Modal shift. We believe the benefit-cost ratio provided of 2.3 to be incorrect, as it assumes modal shift will not be achieved. The proposals for Horningsea will do nothing to encourage modal shift from the village to Cambridge and vice versa. The quiet road or street treatment is not recommended for roads with the amount of traffic Horningsea Road and Clayhythe Road have, according to LTN 1/20 figure 4.1. Even with a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit, as the last traffic count from 2008 indicates, that there are already close to 6,000 vehicles travelling on that road per day. If a modal filter cannot be installed and no space exists within the highway boundary, then an alternative off-road route must be found instead. Horningsea Road is a high-speed road. The path not only needs to be widened, but separated from the road by a verge which meets the desirable minimum separation of 2 metres for a 60-mile-per-hour road. The next section is cost versus benefit. Capital expenditure should not be diverted to regular maintenance, and the proposal fails to create any new links and merely improves very slightly on what already exists. The next section, lack of new links. We would rather see a project which creates a fully usable link with Milton, Waterbeach and Cambridge North as per the original consultation response. For these reasons, we ask the GCP to take this proposal back to the drawing board and deliver a set of the proposals which will provide the following. 1, a safe cycling route in the Horningsea Village. 2, an improved active travel link with Milton, Waterbeach and Cambridge North. 3, an LTN 1/20 compliant route from Horningsea to Cambridge. Thank you.
Thanks, Roxanne. And Peter, are you taking that one?
Thank you, Chair. So the proposals that we've outlined will be LTN 120 compliant. The business case assessment that we touched on before is the process we're obliged to go through, and the answer comes out that the value of this is high. The original Greenways proposition did not include the village. It went to the south of the village, and as part of this engagement, we've made some suggestions around how we might support the movement of cyclists through the village. I think it's fair to say there's more work to do on that. We've suggested a 20-mile-an-hour limit, and we can certainly look at whether there's engineering interventions. You will all know my view on mission creep. But I think in this particular instance, it would make sense, because linking it to the bottom of the village and then not completing the bit to the middle of the village, I think we felt was an opportunity that we need to try and grapple with. There are maintenance implications of this we discussed previously, and again, that's on my to-do list to come back for wider programme issues. It doesn't relate to the capital expenditure on this scheme. And I think there are other interventions in this area that we continue to work on. So at the moment, we're engaging on the Waterbeach to Cambridge busway, which proposes an active travel link in between those two areas. We're still doing more work on what the Water Beach Greenway will look like. So as part of sat upon a wider network, this will feed into that.
Thanks, Peter. And perhaps members would like to come back on those as they wish during the discussion. We're going to ask Peter to.
No, just generally.
Yes, we have. Peter's going to present the report. Or maybe he's not.
Again, same as last time, Chair. Two tables where we've made changes and where we're proposing not to.
Okay, so fine. That's right. I'd forgotten that you're not going to get an individual presentation going with each of these. But so Katie, you identified. Go ahead.
I've cycled the route to Horningsea and back quite often, and as you leave Fen Ditton, there's a small section of 60 miles an hour road to the A14, and then there's a small section north of the A14 bridge towards Horningsea, and then it reduces down to 40. What I find is that people make the most of that 60 mile an hour stretch. They put their foot down to try and get that little bit further, that little bit quicker. And as a cyclist going over, there's some traffic lights to stop so you can go over the slipway onto the A14. And they try to jump the red lights to get past before you go across. So I would really reach out to the county council to reduce those small sections of 60 miles an hour. It's dangerous. It's really unnecessary. It goes 30, 60, 40, 30 over a really short length of road. And that would make cycling feel much safer and actually be much safer. The other thing is there is the junior school, Fen Ditton Junior School, is right next to the road, and I know the families, they would use the cycle route much more to take their children to school, and we know getting children cycling and walking on their own to schools is really important. This is a really good opportunity to set up and enable young children to have really good behaviours right from the beginning. So I think this is a really good plan, meeting 120, getting that speed limit down and making as many connections as possible, because we don't just go in and out of the city, we go around as well, would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Heather?
Chair, just in relation to the 20 mile an hour, one thing that I think is really important to be considered is around the enforcement. So as definitely one councillor in the room will know, in Bassingbourn, a village next to my ward, the speed limit has recently changed to 20 miles an hour. And as I've driven through at the correct speed limit, and I have to say it's quite difficult, so cruise control on to make sure I don't change my speed, twice I've been overtaken by other cars. And I think what we're seeing is where in these new areas where 20 mile an hour is being used, that actually the public aren't necessarily on board with that. And we're seeing things. Now these things happen. I live on a one-way system, and the amount of times I've been confronted of people coming towards me and then getting very angry and me having to say, sort of stand in the middle of the road and, and be defiant, and they need to turn around. It's a one-way system. So I'm not saying that whatever we do, people are going to get things wrong sometimes. And I think, we've got sat navs and things like that, which sort of say you can go one way when you can't. But I do think that, it's acknowledged now that with the 20 mile an hour, we are seeing people not sort of comply. So please, can compliance and making sure that whatever we do can be enforced, I think is really important. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Heather. I've then got Paul, and followed by Claire Daunton.
Thank you, Chair. I think my first comment is I feel that the Horningsea Greenway is a bit of a missed opportunity. Its upgrades to a path that is already there. In 2016, I think Nigel Brickham Associates recommend investigating a route across the Cam, upgrading via Batesby Lock, which would have connected Horningsea to the employment centres, educational centres, and Cambridge North, actually, in the north area of Cambridge. There have also been a group of Horningsea residents who have been campaigning for a route beside the B1047 to Waterbeach, which would, as Waterbeach Newtown builds out, would be a very great benefit to them. I know, I think, as I can see, Councillor Bradnam is here, and I know we've had discussions with those residents about the possibility of that. But as it is, the route is essentially an upgrade to the existing route with, well, whatever the uplift we're targeting will be. In terms of the 20-mile-an-hour route speed limit in Horningsea, there is a lot of traffic through there. People do use it as an alternative to the A10 to avoid the A10 congestion. It is very busy. I think if it is going to be 20 miles an hour, it needs to have physical measures to kind of constrain the speed of the traffic rather than just relying on people, as Councillor Williams suggested, of just kind of obeying the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. Also on that speed limit, I don't really understand why Horningsea and Fen Ditton are treated differently. There's no suggestion of a 20-mile-an-hour limit in Fen Ditton, even though the primary school, as Councillor Thornborough mentioned, is right on the road. And I know there are all sorts of problems there with school drop-off in the morning, and it would benefit greatly from more people walking and cycling to that school. My final point is a similar point to the one I made on the Barton Greenway, which is along the section between Fen Ditton and Horningsea. It is almost entirely not separated from the road. I think the proposal actually is for the 60-mile-an-hour section to be reduced to 40 miles an hour. But again, in order for those speed limits to be complied with, it would be helpful to make highway changes, potentially narrowing the highway, which would then provide the space for the separation for the path. And I think if when the speed limit is being reduced and we're trying to ensure that the vehicle speeds next to the Greenway are lower, it would be good to make those physical interventions to the carriageway as well.
Thank you, Paul. I'll just take Claire Daunton before going to the officers.
I want to use some detail to make a general point. So in relation to the Horningsea Greenways, there's a section, the Wadlows Path, which was upgraded as part of a quick win in consultation with Fen Ditton Parish Council. And it's a very green area of the cycleway, ecologically very important. And it's 2.5 metres wide. In the latest documentation in our papers, it's going to be upgraded to 3 metres. Now, why is that the case? I think Fen Ditton Parish Council feels very strongly. They engaged very deeply in the quick wins conversation, but now we have the recommendation that it should be upgraded to 3 metres. So the general question is, how are disparate views on something like this? So this is one point, there are other points. How are disparate views brought together to make a final decision? And just to emphasise that, I'll give one other example in relation to the Horningsea Greenway, and that is that there are different views of the centre cycle lane down the high street to the church. And this is a very congested area, there's parking on both sides. And there are very different views on whether or not that will be safe for cyclists and what will happen to the parked cars. And I think there's one suggestion in the consultation which doesn't seem to me to take account of all the disparate views. Thanks.
Thank you. Can I take it in the next round, Christopher? Otherwise, I think Peter might suffer from overload. But so, Peter, taking the speed limit down further from 40, compliance in general for these sort of limits, and then from Paula, the question about Bates Bike Lock Crossing, which I think had been originally aspired to. Again, the point about physical measures needed as well as limits, and the speed limit in Fen Ditton as well. And then Claire talking about how conflicting input is really resolved, such as this one about the width of the greenway in Wadlows.
Thank you, Chair. So again, emphasising the reason why we need this ongoing conversations, because a lot of this comes back down to very sort of detailed examples. So speed limits, yes, the intention is to reduce in a number of areas. That's a key part of these proposals. It isn't just about building stuff. It's about saying, actually, we need to find a way to make the general environment more conducive to active travel modes. So speed limit reductions are going to be a key component of that, and you're all aware of the processes we need to go through around regulation orders and the like. Enforcement's a key element of this, and it's not just speed, actually, it's things like parking. And so that's why we are working with the county and South Cambridgeshire colleagues on civil parking enforcement. It's why we're in discussions with speed enforcement authorities around how we can manage that, along with the county council, who's the lead on this, and also looking at 20-mile-an-hour zones. And there is some sort of evidence that says the more 20-mile-an-hour zones you have in an area, the greater the level of compliance. So again, I think there's a conversation that we need to have there. In terms of Paul's question, again, a sort of a lead into answer to a question I was going to give to Roxanne later on. We'll do a technical note on Bates Bike Lock, and we will share that in terms of what opportunities. That was a decision that was taken previously not to include it, but we'll do a technical note on that and bring that forward to you. Again, the issue around physical measures, which is why I think we need that conversation. We are proposing that speed gets reduced to 40 miles an hour, but again, we will go through that process. And in many senses, Claire's is the $64,000 question, isn't it? So I'm glad to say it's above my pay grade, and the final decisions will be made via the Assembly by the Executive Board. But Wadlow's Path's a good example, isn't it? So I'm sat here taking a lot of questions around why I'm not doing more for cyclists, and I'm saying we're going to meet LTN 120. And then we've got a particular area that doesn't quite do that, so we're discussing whether we expand that. And that's difficult because we've got different views. But it's exactly why we need to continue the dialogue with local members, and that needs to get fed in. So if I end up saying we are meeting LTN 120 in every case apart from, then at least there's a rationale and a local input into why that decision was made. But that's why no final decisions today, more work, come back to you, and we'll come back to the Executive Board for a final sign-off. Is that helpful?
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Are you coming back on the answer? Okay, let me take Christopher first, then I'll come to you.
Mine's more of a general observation that this prompts to, so I'm very familiar with the Fen Ditton Horningsea Road, and we're trying to fix problems that are actually caused by something else. And I wonder at what point we raise the conversation up, either with the County Council or even in Highways England. So a big chunk of the traffic that comes through there is because the A10 doesn't work and the Milton Road roundabout doesn't work and is not designed to take the flow. If it did, fewer people would choose to whiz through Horningsea and Fen Ditton to get into Cambridge. And so we can't blame motorists for doing that. So we're trying to stick a sticking plaster on it rather than addressing the real problem. And then, of course, there's the much bigger question is what on earth have we got an A14 junction on a tiny little road like that? If the A10 junction and the A1303 junction at Quai worked properly and the main roads were cleared to flow freely, we would not have to have most of the traffic. Then all of a sudden, most of what we're talking about would be less of an issue. And we've had similar conversations before in this chamber, probably even in here. For example, over Luard Road, people need using that cut through because the traffic lights on Long Road and Hills Road aren't phased to work properly. The bias is wrong and doesn't make the traffic flow along the roads we want it to use. And we discussed it on the Madingley Road improvements, where we were compromising the safety because we need to be able to take bollards out to get big boats through. instead of saying to Highways England, how much do we have to chip in to raise the level of the one bridge that causes people millions of pounds a year. It's not really relevant to this specific discussion because we have to solve the immediate thing, but it's a great danger that we keep fixing a local bit and we put up another barrier and another blockage and a camera here and a speed limit there, but we're not dealing with the real issue. That is a very small road carrying a lot of traffic that it shouldn't be carrying. It's only doing it because we're not stepping back from it and going, how do we make the rest of it work properly, and decide, I'm afraid it's my soapbox, this one, which are the arterial routes that need to work properly for our city to function, and not try and just keep dealing with motorists, and all road users will use whichever way they can get round things that don't work. Sorry, I'll stop rambling at that point.
I think you made some good points there, Christopher. So, Claire, I had you to follow up with another question.
Thank you. It goes back to the point that Katie raised earlier, and that's the speed coming from Horningsea into Fenderton. And there's a very bad, very difficult point, and that's the crossing at the slip road, the A14 slip road. And I'm not sure that what is proposed there will really deal with the dangerous crossing because of the speed that's been mentioned before. And I would also staying with speed at the other end, at the north end of Horningsea Village. There is a proposal for 20 mile an hour, but it doesn't go far enough. It needs to really go right to the edge of the village, beyond up to Clayhythe Road. There really needs to be a good control of speed and of crossing of cyclists, preferred crossing for cyclists.
Thanks, Claire. I'm going to regard that as the last round, and then just invite Peter to respond to Christopher and Claire.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So in terms of Claire's question, we'll take them away. I think there were two specific issues that we need to take away and reflect. Christopher's question is an interesting one. And I tell you, you may well have heard the Welsh Government has decided that an awful lot of their road schemes will not be progressed now because of the impact that, new roads generate new traffic. We've known that for 30 years. The County Council and the Combined Authority are working on what they can do to manage and mitigate the A10. But the A14 is an interesting one, isn't it? Because the National Highways have just opened it. Traffic levels are now higher than they've ever been on those roads, and it's placing increasing pressure on the junctions, which then place pressure on the local environment and the local road network. So it's managing that so we put more capacity in to ease a problem on the national road network, and now we're feeling the impacts on all of our local junctions. If you think from junction 11 on the M11 right the way round, all of the junctions are now beginning to see an impact, and we're at very early stages of that opening up. So there are clearly things we can do, and I know that county colleagues are on it around the A10 and how we manage and mitigate that. But we just need to be careful about putting more highway capacity in, because putting more highway capacity in tends to breed more roads, which then has an impact on some of the things that we're trying to achieve around walking and cycling. And so it's a difficult conundrum.
Just very quick, I fully understand that point. You could argue that traffic that is now on there was otherwise cutting through little roads and villages to get there, rather than necessarily putting more people on there. I wasn't necessarily proposing the A14 needed to be upgraded, but the junctions and some of our roads, if you want to call them county roads, if they flowed, then people would not need to cut through small villages down little roads to get round something that doesn't work. It's a very general point, and I appreciate it's much more complicated than we are here to discussing a Greenway, so I should probably have raised it outside.
No, I think it's perfectly valid to touch that point here. And I mean, obviously it relates to other programs that the GCP has already on its radar screen. So, the Making Connections program is essentially could be another contributor to the sort of goals you're looking for. But I'm going to move on to another Greenway now, if that's okay. We'll take the next one, which is Melbourne. And I'm going to ask County Councillor Susan van der Ven, as a speaker from a partner authority, to make her point.
Thank you very much. I was going to wear this hard hat, which is from the spring of 2017. It says Greater Cambridge City Deal, but with the bucket seat, I think I'll completely disappear if I wear the hat, so I won't. So I'm here today to thank you for the report and the officers who've worked really hard over the last 12, 13 months since they've been in post. I'd like to urge the Assembly to recommend one addition to the 2023 action list, which is the Melbourne to Meldreth Station path upgrade, and I'll explain why. So I mentioned the hard hat from the first City Deal spade in the ground, which was at the 1 mile long Melbourne Cycleway, which goes north from Melbourne Science Park toward Cambridge, and a series of new, at the time, new DFT-funded paths along the A10 up to Trumpington. Together, this series of paths formed the spine for what would become the Melbourne Greenway scheme that was approved by the GCP almost 3 years ago. So the opening of that 1 mile cycleway was also the last spade in the ground for active travel along the A10. Since 2017, we have had 2 extensive public consultations and 1 public engagement exercise recently, and these have certainly raised expectations. I really think we should acknowledge today that since then we have had and are still in the midst of a pandemic, Brexit impacts, new climate change, attributed weather events, and epic inflation, which is just casually mentioned in the report, but the world has really changed. Nevertheless, the need for the Melbourne Greenway has only intensified, both from a sustainable travel point of view and because of a significantly growing workforce along the A10 corridor, from Royston to Cambridge and in between, and most particularly at Melbourne Science Park. So I really welcome the continued ambition that is articulated in today's report for the critical link between Royston and the A505 bridge, comprehensively supported on both sides of the border, and I know we're still waiting for a funding solution. Also, the really important work for an alternative active travel link through Harston and anticipated improvements over the M11 with the Southwest Cambridge New Park and Ride. So Melbourne Science Park is still growing, with 1 new campus about to open next month and an imminent major planning application for expansion by the new owner, Bruntwood SciTech, which together will see significant growth in jobs. MSP's travel to work plan depends on the Melbourne Greenway in all of its elements. The bridge to Royston, a safer route to Cambridge with known vulnerable junctions addressed along Cambridge Road, Cherry Park, Dobbies, the BP station in Harston, really important detail that I think needs more work. And the improved active travel link from Melbourne to Meldreth Station. Unfortunately, the glaring omission in today's report for action in 2023 is that link to Meldreth Station, which was understood locally to be a quick win. Currently, this is a rudimentary public footpath. As part of the Greenway, it will be widened for multi-use, lit for safety at night, and the pedestrian underpass that stands in the middle of it remediated for public safety. And there are really serious concerns around public safety. This upgrade is already funded by Section 106 contributions worth nearly £250,000, the lion's share from TTP at Melbourne Science Park. The funds are now several years old and are sitting in the local authority bank. The urgent remediation of the underpass for public safety reasons has been independently funded in the last few months by third parties locally, parish councils, the Community Safety Partnership, and so on, and action is now underway. That underpass is going to be remediated in the next couple of months. But the upgrade of the path on either side of the underpass is not happening, and therefore the underpass stands to be remediated in isolation. And new employees arriving in Melbourne at the new science park will not have that critical day one optimum travel behavior choice to use a link to a nearby railway station where we are working very hard to recover train ridership post-pandemic. We lost our 30-minute, our half-hourly service during the pandemic, and we've not got it back yet because we've not got the ridership up yet. And Melbourne Science Park is committed to using that station, but they want a safe link to get to the station, and they won't encourage their employees to use that path unless they feel that it's safe to do so. I guess I've made my point, so I hope that the change can be made for the board papers. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Susan. So a point clearly made about a particular segment of this greenway, which I think the case is being made to accelerate delivery of it as a component part, given the resources and the surrounding infrastructure coming into place, already being there. Peter.
Just to put a point of view, actually, not all the resources are there, but nevertheless, we will take the challenge by the board report in 3 weeks' time to add that to the list. We've done a lot of work on it. There's a little bit more work we need to do, but I will take away the challenge to try and add that link to the list, Chair.
I guess that's good news, depending on what the answer is. But let's leave that there and see what other comments we've got on. Thank you very much, Susan, for coming on. Are there any other contributions on the Melbourne Greenway, that aspect or any other? Heather, Katie? Heather and Katie, anyway. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just when we've had this discussion about this particular greenway before, we have talked about making sure that what we do can be future-proofed, because Royston is Hertfordshire, I know, but there is still Cambridgeshire south of Royston. And we made particular reference as well about potential future links to Bassingbourn and other sort of landing villages. So just want to make sure that future-proofing, so we can connect onto this to continue for the rest of Cambridgeshire in that area, is in place, because that's something that I didn't really pick up on through the report.
Katie?
I think the point about connecting to the rail station is really important, and it actually is relevant to Horningsea and the Waterbeach station, because the train network and the stations are actually the skeleton of our network, transportation network, that for the whole region, and which we need, which supports everything else really. And connecting to the rail stations and enabling them to be completely relied on is so important, because people make their life decisions about travelling, and the rail transportation is actually the most reliable at the moment. And Melbourne Science Park is really important to Cambridge, because as well as very expensive housing, it's very expensive for businesses as well. And a lot of the science businesses and the tech businesses go to Melbourne to start, and then maybe move further into Cambridge later. It's absolutely critical. And I know people cycling to Melbourne, and they're right. We're encouraging the businesses to have car-free business plans, and they completely have to be supported. But making links to the train stations must be a priority. So I completely agree with what you've said, and I'm glad you brought that to our attention. Thank you.
Any other contributions to the Melbourne Greenway? No? So, Peter, do you want to take
Thank you,
those two?
Chair. In terms of Heather's question, yes, we are future-proofing. Projected usage and projected issues are included as part of the business case assessments, and that's part of the considerations. And then in Katie's the point around the link with the rail station, we absolutely understand that, which is why we are doing everything we can. Not just that it'll stop Susan emailing and chasing me quite rightly, but we're doing everything we can to get this link in place as soon as we reasonably can. And I'm hopeful by the board report we'll be writing it down.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's finished the discussion on the Melbourne Greenway, and we have one more left, which is Sawston. And I would like to ask Councillor Brian Milnes, as a member of authority, to address his remarks on this greenway. There you are, Brian. Go ahead.
How's that? That's better. Okay. Thank you, Chair. So I'm here on the basis of being a councillor both at parish, district and county level for Sawston. And I just want to add my voice to actually the thanks to the officers, Chris Hussey and Thomas, who have been very closely involved in this. It was particularly satisfying to note that they had actually got on their bikes and done some of the journeys that are proposing here. And they showed one of the difficulties that we've got with our road surfacing. If we're looking to I know Peter's rolling his eyes because this is a common complaint that I've been making for a long time, because the road surfaces that we inherit from the county to do these greenways when they are on the road network means that that modal shift that we're looking for, that's absolutely critical, is likely to be inhibited by the fact that the road surfaces are so poor. So elsewhere, I'm very supportive of the scheme. But I would like to make a couple of points about the second of two proposed extensions, and that's the one to the west of the A1301 bypass from Sawston down to what was the Spices site, now owned by Huawei. Now, it's rather perverse that I find myself suggesting that that may be superfluous to requirements. And I'm questioning the AMAT's response. You're saying that they require a 20% improvement. But there is almost no cycle traffic on the bypass at the moment because there is an alternative from getting from Sawston Village Centre to the junction at the top of the bypass and then onwards. So I've got very particular questions remaining over that, which I'll just make briefly now for consideration by GCP officers, because the CSET route comes with a very direct and segregated path, footpath and cycle path into Cambridge, into the CBC and beyond. And having had children who have done that route, so getting from Sawston into Long Road in one case and further on in another, then that obviously would become the preferable route because it doesn't have the problems of going alongside a road and a main road. So the Cambridge Road in Sawston is quite a wide and fast route, but we've got a nice cycleway there already. And unless we have got particular reason and rationale to go further south, so on to, for example, Whittleford Parkway, which may be part of the plan, and maybe if it is, then we should articulate that. Then I'd like to just bring that to the GCP officers' attention. And yes, as your officers know, the existing roadway is not suitable for purpose, and I'm very keen that we do what is necessary. And actually, I'd concur that we probably need to be setting ourselves realistic targets for how many additional cycle trips, particularly these pathways, will give us. I think that's enough from me. Thank you. Joe.
Thank you, Brian. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I've already agreed we'll take the target thing away, and I know that the officers were making copious notes as you were. Anything that will reduce the size of the network and reduce the burden is welcome. I think we need a conversation linking in, particularly with Whittlesford, and let's see how that looks going forward, because there's a particular benefit, I think, in keeping that there. But again, the points that were raised previously about the need for this ongoing dialogue with local members, I think is going to be important.
Actually, Chair, can I just make one more point? Just about the that 1301 alongside it. We haven't had a conversation with Huawei in a long time, but when I had an original conversation with them, they were quite amenable to having the cycle path on the inside of their curtilage, and certainly that I would like to throw into the equation too.
And we are reconnecting with Huawei on that issue,
Great,
so we'll
thank
be
you.
able to determine that one way or the other.
Thank you. And so are there any other contributions on the Sawston Greenway? Neil?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to make a more general comment on all of them up to this point, and going through...
Are we going to talk about the general programme after we finish talking about Sawston?
Okay, that's good if I can speak then. Thank you, Chair.
Katie?
Sawston Village College has quite a wide catchment area, and I know students there who lived in Trumpington, and the bus route was cut drastically, and I know students, young teenagers, cycling that route. And again, we need to encourage children, do whatever we can to help them. And I actually wonder whether we should, where they're primary schools or secondary schools, we ought to look at what is the catchment area and think about improving the routes in. And it'd be really interesting to know if there's guidance specifically about assisting children and young adults to take up cycling, and where we have the opportunity on the greenways to add things for children and young people. I think we could consider that. Thanks.
Katie? Any other points on Melbourne? Peter, is there a response?
We'll take that away,
Katie's
Chair.
point?
We'll take the Sawston Village College issue away, and we'll look at that.
Excellent. Okay, so we go on to the section, the more general section, and we have some public questions that we should take ahead of that. So the first one of those is from Linda Worth from British Horse Society. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, thank you, Councillor Bear Park, for actually mentioning the word NMU. It's the first time I've heard that mentioned this afternoon. The greenways are supposed to accommodate all forms of non-motorised users. That's pedestrians, cyclists and equestrians. I'll take my comments in reverse order because that's the way you actually looked at the greenways. You were talking about the Barton Greenway to start with, and Councillor Bear Park did actually mention Haggis Farm. So there are two roundabouts either side of the M11 bridge at Barton. Equestrians are included, which we appreciate, in the proposals for the bridge, but not for the roundabout crossings. These were what you actually mentioned. The GCP analysis of the Barton Greenway shows that 18% of respondents to the crossings were equestrians, the same number as the M11 bridge. Cambridge Polo Club, with 60 horses, is right next to the M11 slip road, and Mill Iron Cobs, with 6 young horses that require regular moving to their fields, is on the other side of the roundabout. These road users must be included in the crossing proposals prior to approval of this route, for the safety of all road users. Horningsea Greenway. Wadlow's path was discussed. It is absolutely essential that this path is upgraded to enable equestrians to use it as well. It links Byway 85.5 Fen Ditton to the new bridleway network being created around the Marley development. The alternative access for equestrians, some of whom actually exit from their paddocks onto Wadlow's path, would be to use the busy, often congested Ditton Road, which you've all discussed this afternoon as being absolutely horrendous for cyclists. Yet this, without our access on Wadlows Road, that is the route that horse riders will be using. On Friday at the Bosham and Swaffham Greenway stakeholders meeting, we were assured that this link would be provided. Wadlows Path will need redesignation since it is currently partly a footpath. To upgrade to a bridleway, in our opinion, would require no changes other than maintenance of hedging and potentially removal of some low branches. Pinch points on bridleways are acceptable. And of course, there's the user hierarchy on a bridleway that horse riders give way to pedestrians, cyclists give way to pedestrians, and cyclists give way to horse riders. On a more general matter, equestrians have responded to consultations on the designs presented. Their subsequent exclusion by an RSA, which is often post-construction, means that they have been misled into providing their support for a scheme and lost their opportunity to object to their exclusion. Designs presented for consultation must be deliverable. Unlike the Gore-Sawston Greenway, which excluded equestrians post-construction, designs must meet not only cycling requirements, but also those for other users prior to consultation and construction. Vague catch-all caveats such as, where appropriate, if possible, subject to RSA, do not mitigate responsibility for accuracy and honesty when you're collecting data. Thank you.
I'll take the other public question from Roxanne de Bow and CamCycle, and then I'll ask Peter to respond.
Thank you. I'm sure everyone would know that CamCycle represents lots of members who are very excited about the Greenways project, and we just have very high expectations. So in that context, here is our question today. For many years, CamCycle, along with other stakeholders and local residents, has repeatedly raised concerns about the length of time and the delays involved in developing the Greenways proposals. The response has always been that this is the time required to ensure quality delivery of the Greenways routes, including things like compulsory purchase, should that be required. However, with each new Greenways consultation, it is apparent that as more time passes, the quality of the Greenways proposals is being diluted. Shared paths of inadequate width, routes that lack accessibility for users of adapted cycles and wheelchairs, quiet routes on roads with significantly too much car traffic, travelling too fast, poor junction design, compromises on crossings, and the loss of promised connections like bridges, Bates Bight, that undermined what were good aspirations for our greenways. For example, removing proposals to update Bates Bight Lock Bridge to allow trikes, cargoes, bikes, and other non-standard cycles and wheelchairs in line with LTN 1/20 is what will make the Horningsea Greenway inaccessible to many potential users. How can the GCP justify these designs which, due to the poor quality, will fail to deliver the modal shift that we all claim to be seeking? How will the GCP ensure that the proposals are brought up to standard, including LTN 1/20, which is applicable to rural areas, so that Cambridgeshire residents get the quality of infrastructure that they deserve? And Peter has already alluded to the fact that it is LTN 1/20 compliant, or it will be, but we're continuing to find and raise in our consultation responses issues that aren't meeting LTN 1/20. So can we be specific about how that will achieve the standard? Thank you.
Roxanne? Peter, would you like to take those two
Thank you,
questions?
Chair. So in terms of Linda Wolf's question, as we outlined in the paper, the further work is required on the roundabout crossings. That's going to require highway modelling. It will require safety audits, estimates of current and future projected usage, and will involve discussions with local members and key stakeholders. So we sort of outlined that in the paper. Upgrading Wadlow's path to a bridleway was not within scope, and I think the issues you raise are maintenance issues, and they're not issues for for the Greater Cambridge Partnership, and I'm not going to place an obligation on the County Council around cutting back. That's for another place. Road safety audits are independent. It's really important they're independent. They are undertaken as schemes develop and post schemes, and they're undertaken to protect all users as schemes are developed. We continue to actively engage with road safety colleagues of the County Council on all of our schemes. We absolutely support the process, and we will continue to do so. It is essential that this independent process continues as we develop schemes, without, frankly, without question. In terms of Roxanne's question, the ambition remains unchanged. As said, we are going to comply with LTN 120. There will be lots of examples that you wish to raise as part of the regular engagement that I've spoken about with local members and key stakeholders, and we look forward to that engagement going forward. We will produce a technical note on Bates Bike Lock, and we'll examine what the possibilities are around that, and we're happy to share that. But again, this is not the final staging post for the Greenways network. There are more decisions to come, more work to do, and we look forward to doing that in constructive discussions and constructive challenge with key stakeholders and local members. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. So it's open for members to talk about issues that relate to the programme in general. I think I need to take Neil first because he had a go already.
Thank you very much, Chair. First to note that I very much support the Greenways programme, and I think that it's going to enhance the region. There have been a number of questions and comments that relate to highways, and I don't want to talk highways here. This is GCP, but clearly we are working together, and thank you very much, Peter, for mentioning that. The one thing I do want to have minuted is that maintenance will be a big part of this going forward. And with the GCP, we don't have access to commuted sums to do this sort of thing. And so I would appreciate Peter commenting. I think this is something that we have to work out, obviously, between the GCP and Cambridgeshire Highways, especially going forward. But a number of questions in the document relate to maintenance. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Neil. Any others? Oh, three up straight away. So I've got Eka, Paul, and Simon.
Thank you, Chair. My point is just a general point about communication. Communication with members has been mentioned a few times today. And as these greenways obviously have evolved, there's been changes and delays for a vast number of reasons. It's not always clear why some of the changes are made from the very initial proposals to how they've ended up now. And the reason for example, Councillor Van der Wey said about the delays to the Melbourne station, and also changes and delays have been mentioned by Roxanne de Bow on behalf of CamCycle. How is member engagement currently carried out, and could there be greater communication from officers with the reasons for delays and changes to proposals? For example, engagement with the local members and members here when certain aspects come up with various greenways.
Thank you, Annika. Paul?
So just a kind of general point about the objectives of the Greenways programme. So the District Council, County Council, City Council have all declared climate emergencies. And the Combined Authority has stated objective of reducing car traffic, I think, or car traffic by 15% compared with the baseline by 2030. So these programmes are not lightweight, nice to have programmes. The mode shift from a car to a bike is an extremely good way of reducing carbon emissions. But obviously this programme is under some pressure in terms of what it's trying to do, in terms of the budget. Inflation is eroding the budget available. So I think we need to be very clear about what the priority is here. in terms of the development of these schemes. These schemes need to be about mode shift and maximising mode shift. And I appreciate there are other interests. Obviously, you know, Linda has expressed the equestrians' interest, and I fully understand those. And it's important that we maintain the existing utility. But the focus of the funding that is spent on these programmes must be about mode shift. This is, you know, we have this overarching priority for these programmes.
Paul? Simon?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to thank the officers for bringing forward this programme. It's a really important programme. I agree with previous comments that this is a significant contribution towards modal shift, reduction in carbon emissions, but it's also a big significant contribution to better health and well-being. And anybody who's used these cycleways will know how enjoyable it is to go out into the countryside and so on. So it's recreation as well as commuting and going to school and college. So really significant programme. My issue is that we've got prioritisation by timetable. There's a £76 million allocation, very high rates of inflation, which will no doubt endure for a number of years, and we're already 20% over-programmed, £111 million over-programmed. So I think before we go much further with this programme, we need to consider prioritisation and, if necessary, rephase the timetabling of these schemes, because otherwise we may end up with important greenways, and from the point of view of modal shift and increased usage, being cut out because they're at the wrong end of the timetable. So I think we need to introduce prioritisation by Benthamite principle as opposed by timetabling. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Helen, I've indicated, but I'll take these back to Peter and do that in the next round, Helen. So Neil, about maintenance with the County Council. Annika refers to communications and also the changes between what was put out into the stakeholder dialogue this time versus what had been put out in the conceptual stage before that. Paul really advocating that modal shift needs to be treated as the dominant priority, and Simon talking about the potential need for prioritisation as inflation sets in.
Thank you, Chair. Maintenance, we would agree. I mean, we've spoken about it previously. We're still working with county colleagues to find a solution to this, but spending a lot of money on it, significantly enhancing the active travel offer. We need to have surety that it can be maintained going forward. Communication is going to be very important going forward. We've moved from the concept now to the detail. We've gone through the engagement process that I think the Assembly and the Board wanted to see. I think we now need very structured conversations with local members about how we take that forward. And I think you might recall I asked the question at my general introduction as to how members may see that going forward. I think we need to be arranging time in diaries to go through the detail of what is possible, what isn't possible, and what those options really look like. And I go back to Claire's example of whether it's 1.5 or whether it's 3. That level of detail is important if we're truly going to make a success of this. Paul, I agree. That's the nature of the challenges. I mean, we set a 15% target a while back, which is slightly different from the combined authorities, but it doesn't matter. It's a significant reduction in traffic in our area. Significant reduction in traffic. You've given me the duff traffic in our area, so we need to be mindful of that in terms of those detailed discussions that we have. We do, though, need to be cognizant of the assessment process that the Department for Transport has. we need to go through that and we need to be demonstrating what it says. Simon, we've currently got a prioritisation discussion scheduled for the autumn meeting. And we think that timeless is right at the moment. And I think that nevertheless, in terms of your general point, clearly we shouldn't be having prioritisation by timeline. There should be a much fuller, more fulsome consideration by yourselves and the executive board, and hopefully that schedule item will allow for that.
Thank you, Peter. I've got Helen and then Heather.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo the absolute priority in my mind is around mode shift, and that any compromises we still need to make should all be tested against which alternative, if we have to decide, is going to give us most modal shift. I guess I'll also sort of encourage flexibility, and that, we've heard today, powerful argument seems to me that the Meldreth to Melbourne link we need to get on with it. It's really important, and let's not wait for the rest of that greenway to happen. Equally, we've heard that upgrading 2.5 width path that was only recently done to a 3 metres may not be a priority, and maybe sort of taking time and money that we may not have if we have to make compromises due to inflation. So I think overall it's a kind of urge to try and get some quick wins within these schemes if we can, but I particularly echo the idea that above all we should be testing against our original objectives of the city deal, and that is around mode shift. Thanks.
Thank you, Heather. And thank you, Helen. Now, Heather.
Thank you, Chair. 2 points from myself, one of which is in relation to the public question. I have to say I was sort of saddened by the second paragraph, and I think there is some work that we could be done to look at how we do consultations and what have you, because it's, I'm not saying this is the intent, but the context of the question suggests that we're sort of disenfranchising people because of not necessarily what we're doing, but the way in which we're consulting. And I think that's really important to not go unnoted. And I think we've spoken about communication, but also I appreciate, I know Peter's going to say there are processes, and there are, but these are things that we are doing for local residents. We don't want to do them to them. And I think that was something that I found sad to read, and I hope there is something that can be done to try and not make people feel that way, and hopefully that not everyone will always agree with what happens, but at least they feel they've had their say in what's done. That's my first point. On the second point, comes back to what Councillor Smith said in relation to the over-programming. It's a really important point, and I know we've looked at sort of budgets and looked at the different financing of all sorts of projects across. And as been said earlier, greenways is something that we normally all agree on, which is always lovely. And I'd hate because actually it's not so, it then becomes almost less high profile. And it is important to make catering for everybody when we go forward with these things. My biggest fear is that we have sort of a half-developed route, that some have sort of abandoned projects because the money is run out or whatever it is, or actually that one Melbourne only works if you've got Fulbourn. I know they're not together, I'm just trying to pluck them because I can see local members of Fulbourn and Melbourne, so I'm saying that now. If things don't join up the way that they need to, I'm almost wondered whether it's important to sort of create that spoke out, to make sure that we don't just have half of a greenway going to nowhere, especially if we started from the edge in. But and that's hard for me to say as somebody that's right on the border of Cambridgeshire. Our residents are equally as important as those at the central of Cambridgeshire. But yeah, for not just myself but others as well.
Thanks, Heather. Claire Ruskin.
there's some agreement, some disagreement, I think, with the previous speakers. I think we've got to really brutally focus on delivering good rather than aiming for perfection. We've got to aim for the main branches and trunks of this tree rather than every twiglet. So mode shift, the daily commute, particularly school journeys, really important to get people into the good habits that we know they should be on. I would do the development in an agile project style, which is to get these main things started, finished, delivered in a usable way, and then add the twiglets, the bits of perfection that we can that will make a real difference. So we know there will be endless edge conditions. We'll have the Cottenham question, the Swavesey question, the any other question about a particular route that people need to travel. But if we don't get some trunks delivered, then we'll never get the twiglets sorted. So unless some of these minor changes are actually dangerous or not effective in a big way, like the 2.5 metres versus the 3 metres, I think we've got to say 2.5 is better than nothing and move to some of the big branches, get those delivered as quickly as we can, and then tweak as we can afford to later.
Katie?
Yes, the figure of 15% is, I think, is actually, the traffic has increased since that target was set. So I think my understanding is nearer 25% for the area we cover. And we need to recognise that in the urban areas, we have to be targeting much higher because it's much more difficult to do the shift in rural areas. And from conversations at the Combined Authority, the shift in rural areas is as great amongst residents as those in the urban areas. They want to have alternatives to be able to not use their car or even not own their car. So I think that, as Paul was saying, this is so critical. It is so critical. Every time we hear about, you know, we're not going to reach one, we're going to be over 1.5 degrees, and politicians have to make the decisions. You know, it's our responsibility to really grasp this and do every single thing we can as quickly as we can. So the work that's been done is great, and it's fantastic hearing about the support amongst the politicians here, but we do need to get on with this.
Thank you, Katie. Yes, go ahead briefly, Simon.
I don't think I've ever disagreed with Claire before. I hope it's the only time I will have to. I don't think we should compromise on the width of these routes. I think it should be informed by safety. We also have to understand that they have to have sufficient width to carry the capacity in a safe way. I think 2.5, unless it's technically proven otherwise, is a bit too narrow. I'm actually campaigning in my own ward, want to be increased from 4 to 5 metres because I know it's going to be carrying a lot of traffic, and that's the standard that's really going to be needed to ensure the pedestrians are safe from the cyclists and the cyclists are safe from each other. So I'm concerned about narrow cycle dual-use routes. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. I'm going to regard that as the last round. So if I could come back to Peter for some responses, and then I'll talk about summing this up. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So I think many sort of common themes there in terms of compromises, in terms of the flexibility to deliver it in sections, but making sure those sections themselves make sense, not just building something that might never be linked up. So I think that's really important. Heather, I take the point on consultation, and we should always keep under review and reflect on it. Equally, some of these things are answer A or answer B, and if you pick one that's not decided on, there's an element of, well, I didn't like the consultation because it's not the right answer, and I think we just need to be cognizant of that on some of these. Is it 1.5 metres or 3 metres? Because if you back the other one, then you're not necessarily going to think it was a great process. You're right on over-programming, but I have absolute confidence that you and the executive board will not allow me to build half a greenway, and that will be for your considerations in the autumn when you do that. Claire, absolutely, delivery, get on with it. It builds confidence. It's cheaper. There's a whole host of things we need to do. I think we do need to get that balance right in terms of making sure we put the right thing in. And then, Katie, absolutely right. 50% really means 22%, and actually it doesn't account for the future planned growth. So it takes the target even further, which brings you back to my point earlier on the Welsh Government sort of ceasing premature road building and investing in active travel and other modes, which comes back to a lot of the points that you've made previously. Hopefully that covers it, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. So to try and sum this up, and I'm going to ask you to finish trying to respond to one question that I have after I've been through the other points that come through the debate. But I just wondered whether, to round us off, you could give us some comments to characterise where this sort of programme for the Greenways really stands on a sort of wider basis than Greater Cambridge. I've not heard of programmes like this in many other places stretching out into rural areas, and I just wonder whether you could give me a sort of sense check on help us calibrate what we're doing here. But, I mean, to me it seems a very innovative thing still, and something that we should be very proud of, and just wondered whether there was any evidence of how unusual that was across the country. But whilst you're thinking about that, just wanted to try and capture some of the other points that have been raised for our report. And I think there's a series of things that have been raised which have been kind of accepted and commitments made. In particular, I think a very significant one about modal shift. I think that there seems to be coming through this a feeling that that needs to be our primary measurement tool for what we are achieving through this programme, and that therefore we do expect to have a conversation with you about what the targets should be for that, so that we can make sure that we are measuring something towards an end point. You did the question of what had previously been aspired to as a crossing at Batespike Lock. I think there is a commitment there that you would come back to us in some form and tell us what the situation is with regard to that. So I regard that as not a finally closed issue, but one which we need to hear some more. I think we noted from you that after Councillor van der Ven raised her point about this segment of the Melbourne Greenway between the Science Park and the Meldreth Station, that you would endeavour to see if that could not be included as an early win in 2023. So we'd like to note that down and capture that as a point in our report to the board. I think also in response to Councillor Milne's point for the Sawston Greenway, that I think we would like to see the question of whether an aspect of that could be superfluous when we get rigorous with a modal shift goal and in relation to the CSET opportunity as well. And I think that we have also raised, and you've agreed to take away, the need for a structured dialogue with members to improve communications around this. So I think I've sensed a lot of questions from members where they feel they haven't got an answer or clarity about something. It would be good to kind of reset communications so that going forward there is a clearer dialogue. Not one that holds up progress, but one which informs it and enriches the process. And the sort of thing that I have heard discussed is the idea of maybe a half-day conference for members from areas where there are greenways planned to meet the team and to listen to their process and feed into that process and set up something ongoing from that. That's just an idea going in. And then I think on the question of inflation, that's been highlighted and recognised as a potential future issue, and you've said that that's scheduled in for a wider review across the GCP for the autumn. But I think the point that was made specifically from this meeting is that we want to see that any adjustment in the programme that was required left what we did rational and value-adding, rather than a lot of disjointed things that don't make sense and waste investment that has been made. So those are the things that I would plan to reflect and highlight in the report to the board. And I just wondered if I could come back to you to help us calibrate what we're doing here, because I think it's worth recognising that whilst we have many things that we would like to be a bit different, that it's possible that we are doing something that is actually quite innovative overall, and we should feel rather proud.
I think that's right, Chair. I think we're trying to do an awful lot really quite quickly, and I know it doesn't feel quick. I know it's taking longer than you want. But other networks like this, and there aren't many, have been built over 10, 20, 30 years, and we're trying to do it all at a similar point in time. In terms of my working experience, the only example I can give is Cycle Superhighways in London. And actually it feels quite similar to that, because there's an awful lot in the background that nobody sees, but it's then when you start showing the detail, everybody gets interested. Everyone will sign off a concept, everyone will be happy with the strategy. What they want to see is exactly where does that line go and what's the detail of that design, and that's the bit where everyone wants to get round the maps and get interested in it. And so I think if we can keep that in mind, it's 150 kilometres of stuff. And we've got more work to do, and I think the idea of a half-day session, Chair, we'll take that away, and I think that might be a good catalyst for those conversations. But I think I've said repeatedly today that those ongoing discussions with local members and key stakeholders is going to be important, because we're now at that detailed stage, and there are going to be some compromises and some decisions that we, I say we, you are going to have to support taking. And that's really important. But I think, you know, if we roll forward 3 or 4 years when this is open and it being used, actually, the hope is this will be a phenomenal asset to the Greater Cambridge area. We need to keep hold of that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Pete, for that. I just intended to check before we moved on that apart from the points that I listed just now that we want to report to the board, there have obviously been a series of smaller points of view expressed, which were received by you in terms of them still remaining open questions where the team was listening and was taking some things on board. Just wanted to check that the stage that we're at with the board in the programme on these schemes isn't held up by any of those issues. So the issues were planning permission and land acquisition predominantly. Those issues still can remain open and subject to good decisions, even if we've had to take decisions on planning applications and land acquisition in the meantime.
That's right. But in terms of the individual points that have been raised, that they are still a matter of discussion, and we need to sit down probably on an individual basis and go through them.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That was a lengthy discussion. It was our major item this afternoon, so thank you very much. Thank you to the team. Nice to see you all together. And sounds like you're going to be on at another time as well with members. So thanks very much for all the work that's gone on behind the scenes. Well, we get to item number 7, which is electricity grid reinforcement, updates and next steps. And we have no public questions on this. And Niamh, are you introducing this? Would you like to go ahead?
Thank you, Chair. So this is good news. I think that's how I would summarise the paper. I think we're taking you some good news, which is quite nice. So you'll recall having discussed and agreed the principle of supporting the upgrade of the, or reinforcement rather, of the grid network. The board and you here agreed that you'd be prepared to support that by some pretty significant financial sum, which was really good news. What we also agreed was that in tandem we would engage with government and engage with various other stakeholders around what other options there might be, what alternative funding there might be. And indeed that's paid off. And UKPN have essentially agreed now to fund these works. So it's really good news. And it's you know, I've just taken over this project, but it's really around colleagues that have been working on this previously. You know, testament to their effort and engagement and the consultants we've got on board that successful outcome has been achieved. So what we think that means is that timescales are unlikely to be significantly impacted, which is also good, although that's also slightly difficult when you're no longer in charge of a project. So what we are continuing to do and what we say here in next steps is that we're going to continue to work with UKPN to facilitate that coming forward and be as helpful and useful as possible in terms of engaging with local stakeholders and within the sort of public sector sphere, perhaps around planning or cable routing with and whatnot. So we're letting you know the good news, and we're also asking for kind of agreement around, or comments indeed, around our proposal to kind of step back from our significant role as we're not a funder anymore, but remain as an important kind of facilitator. We think UKPN are happy with that, and it may be that we need some sort of formal arrangement with UKPN to make that really clear. But we talk to them regularly, and we'll continue to do that. That's all I've got, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. So this is a report with an outcome in it, and there's no huge board decision at the end of it. Right. So this is shared back with members for any comment they want to make. In that context, probably we don't want to go on for ages about this, but it is a good news piece of the agenda today. So immediately loads of hands go up, of course. Please make sure you have something that you don't think anyone else is going to say, and you can change your mind when you've heard them. So, Heather first.
What I was going to say is the decision to was difficult for many of us. I think it's something that was really wrestled. We knew it was needed, but equally we sort of felt it was other people's responsibilities. I think if I recall correctly, it was not a happy something that we positively wanted to do. It was something that we felt we were sort of forced to do because we were filling a gap. So I'm really pleased that gap's been filled. It means that we might, hopefully get our Greenways projects finished because it releases some capital. I don't see any harm. In fact, I think it's a positive thing to be at the table. We might not be in control of it, but at least you know what's up and what's happening. So long as we have officer capacity to deal with that, I think that's something from a scrutiny point of view we should make sure is in place before anything carries on. But yes, obviously, it was one of those that I don't think we were entirely happy about stumping up the money. So it was all was gone well in the end, Chair.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Heather. Can I just say, okay, Simon, Paul, remember these because I'm not writing them down. Yeah, it's everyone. Okay. The item we don't have a decision to make about, but okay. Simon, but
thank you.
Try and make the remarks economic, please.
Oh no, I've got a lot to say on this. I think the last time this came up, I said that this was the GCP at its very best, because without electricity, the whole agenda goes to naught, and its lack of electricity is a barrier to jobs. It's a barrier to new homes that we need. And it's a complete barrier to decarbonisation of heating and transport. I can't think of a more important issue than electricity grid enforcement and the Greater Cambridge, apart from water. And they stand together. We can't, and so what's the problem? Well, the problem is institutionalised. And what we've had here is it's institutionalised because of the regulatory regime that the government has over the whole of the utility network. And it's like it's public policy stroke market failure. And it took another public institution to come and address that public policy failure. And this kind of speaks to what Christopher was saying earlier, which was we've actually got to look at the source, the root cause of the problem, rather than fiddle around with the consequences of the problem, which is simply that the regulatory framework is not fit for purpose to support a growing regional economy like Greater Cambridge. And that's the one that needs fixing. So we need to do that, but in the meantime, I think we mustn't relinquish the GCP's role in this, because there's yet another set of grid reinforcements to be addressed. And we mustn't keep the government's eye off that particular ball.
Simon, Christopher?
Try and make it very brief. This is clearly a great success of GCP, and congratulations to the team for the way that we've handled it. We were prepared to put our money where our mouth was on something important, and it made something happen. We are asked whether we support the idea that the GCP officers should remain involved and close to this. Absolutely, this is critical for all the reasons we've heard. So thank you and well done.
Thanks, Christopher. Did you indicate, Claire?
I agree with both of you. Do keep on the case. Nobody cares about our electricity supply as much as we do, including UKPN.
Thank you. Other Claire? No? No. Neil?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm interested in how this works together with the combined authority. You obviously had similar concerns, but on the wide area, this is obviously something strategic, and I'm interested in how we go ahead and maintain control into the future. You know, I'm not a big fan of privatization, and to what extent this is, basically. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Neil. Paul?
So there was a report, I may have shared it with a few people a while ago, from the IET, Institute of Engineering and Technology, about the lack of investment in this area. I think their estimate was we were short something like £300 billion in investment in grid infrastructure to support the transition to electrification. Given that the emerging, we're working currently, or the councils are working currently on the emerging local plan, do you have a feel for whether we are still short of significant grid reinforcement in this field, in this area? Because I, to be honest, don't know the answer to that. I'd be interested in your view.
Thanks, Paul. Annika, no? Helen, yeah.
It was a similar point, really. Well, firstly, congratulations. Secondly, if I remember right, when we were first looking at this, we were looking at possibly 3 substations, and then we decided we only got money for 2, and these are the 2 that have been funded. So have we given any consideration at all to not releasing all of the money that we now don't need for these 2, but carrying on with looking at the 3rd on the list?
Having heard what everyone was saying and actually understanding the concerns already for the next local plan, where grid capacity is a very close second to water capacity in the local plan, the authorities dealing with the local plan are not the utility authorities. We can speak out, but we have to recognise and get evidence about the shortfalls, which we have to try and deal with when we want talking about sustainable development. So I note in 1.8 there are some suggestions that we note this and we can comment on it, but I wonder if we could actually ask you, the GCP, to consider preparation of a Greater Cambridge energy strategy and a delivery plan to identify the electrical supply requirements to decarbonise domestic and commercial power, heating, and the regulatory changes and other financial mechanisms required to secure investment. Because this is not happening, and if we could focus on this, the government is focusing on Cambridge and the Cambridge area because of the importance for the national economy, and we need to highlight the shortfalls in the grid capacity. The water issues are being seriously looked at by Water Resources East, who is seriously looking at the grid capacity.
Katie? So everyone who wants to has spoken. Would you like to pick out the things that
Yes.
needed a reaction, a response?
Yeah, sure. So on working with the CPCA, Neil, and that possibly comes to your point, I think, as well, Katie. So we work closely with CPCA on these proposals, and they have a broader role and remit around this work, much broader than our remit and commitment with government. But that happened, and that was positive. But I know that they're working on lots of other schemes that we wouldn't necessarily have involvement in, I think, for the right reasons, probably. In terms of losing control of the project, I think it's a real balance, and I think that's why we're saying, as officers, we want to stay involved as much as we can to support the delivery and to make sure that the eye isn't taken off the ball, for want of a better phrase. And if the Assembly and the Board are happy with that, then we'll continue to do that. In terms of the local plan, I think Katie kind of pick that up. I know there are still significant issues. I don't think we've had a steer that members are asking us to kind of bear responsibility for those issues, but it sounds like it might be something that you perhaps want to discuss further. In terms of Katie's question around a kind of overarching strategy for kind of energy security, I think my first response as an officer would be we need to think really carefully about whether or not that's our core role, and happy to have that discussion with members. But I think it is really worth considering quite carefully. Helen, the third substation, can I get back to you just after I've reminded myself of the various optioneering we went through and speak to the Road Knight Taylor about it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another. I thought you spoke longer than anyone else already.
I did, but look, this is really, I mean, look, we've got to take this really seriously.
That's what you said last time.
Yeah, no, but it hasn't been taken as seriously as I wanted it to be taken. I'm sorry. So I'm going to come back on this. Now, just look at what happened. You facilitated a £20 million investment that otherwise would not have happened in Greater Cambridge for a £500,000 outlay. Just let that sink in, right? And what has it facilitated? The development of 5,700 homes. I think that's around worth 1.7 billion in built environment, right? And 270,000 square metres of commercial floor space. If that's mostly R&D, that's probably enough to accommodate 4,000 jobs. Salary rent roll, probably £200 million per annum. This is what the GCP is all about, isn't it? It's about facilitating development, facilitating the growth in the economy. How can this not be an objective of the GCP? So I think what Councillor Thornborough suggested seems to be a good idea. And that's the message that we would like to be sent from the Assembly to the Board. And that's what we're here, that's what the Assembly's here to do.
Thanks, Simon. So did you have another comment on that, Niamh? No? Okay. So I think the discussion amounts to a big congratulations to officers who brought this situation about. I mean, don't let's forget that. This is a significant piece of work which could have been much bigger, but achieved its objective before that. So that is really excellent in all the ways that Simon put dimensions to just then. It seems that the Assembly would like to say yes to the suggestion that the GCP continues in a sort of facilitating role on this as it goes forward, so that we retain contact with it. And then the question has been raised, which I think we would pose to the Board, about what is the GCP's role in the wider energy plans for the area in the longer term, given that we have another local plan coming up. I think that that is something that it sounds like we would like the Board to consider whether we do have a role in that or not. Okay, so thank you very much, Niamh, for that. And let's move on to the next item, which is item number 8, Smart Cambridge Innovation Prospectus. Who is presenting this? Dan.
Thank you,
Clark
Chair.
is presenting this.
So I'm Dan Clark, Head of Innovation and Technology. So the Smart Cambridge programme was set up to explore how new and emerging technologies, as well as data, could support the delivery of the wider programme. To support this aim, SMART engages with the private sector and academia to support the trialling of new technologies. An example of this is the £17.5 million award that we've just received of inward investment for the trialling of autonomous vehicles, which is a partnership between the Greater Cambridge Partnership, between industry with support from Stagecoach and the University of Cambridge. Currently, the process of engagement tends to be reactive and unstructured. A number of these approaches don't align with the Greater Cambridge Partnership objectives, and sifting can be time-consuming with a number of issues, including procurement rules. So that can be a barrier to working with companies that approach the authority even though they are not seeking funding. We aren't testing the whole market, so we may not have sight of better solutions than the people that are approaching us. The approach of developing an innovation prospectus will therefore make engagement with the private sector and academia much more systematic and proactive, setting out the challenges that the GCP faces and how companies can engage with us, as well as a set of principles that companies will need to adhere to that will ensure that we're being ethical when it comes to the collection of data and that we're making sure that we're considering things like cybersecurity. So what are the impacts of this approach? Well, we can be much more focused on the testing of technologies that can support and future-proof the delivery of the city deal. For example, we could use behaviour change as an example. So we would pose a particular challenge. So how do we reward sustainable travel? But the market can then respond to that with potential approaches. We understand within the market what solutions there are. And then we can use the city as a test bed to actually understand how those approaches will impact our outcomes before a full procurement is carried out. And the information that we've gathered through the test bed process will inform any procurement that we go through. It also supports inward investment, as well as local companies being able to use the city as a test bed. We would attract investment into the city, and the openness of the city would encourage companies to relocate here. Using the city as a test bed also allows us to understand technologies and how they can be applied. For example, there was a spin-out from the University of Cambridge called Vivacity that we started working with about 7 years ago, who developed a technology that used low-resolution cameras to count vehicles, pedestrians and cyclists. Over the years, we've worked with them on a number of pilots, and actually we went out to an open procurement about 2 years ago, and we've now done a full at-scale deployment of their technology within the city. It strengthens collaboration and builds on Cambridge's reputation for innovation, and procurement becomes less of an issue as engagement is driven by the GCP with opportunities openly advertised through the prospectus. So initially, the prospectus will focus on the City Access Programme, will be a living document that can support the delivery of other work streams, and we will evolve as we get feedback from the market to make it more efficient to use. So the Joint Assembly is invited to consider the proposals, to note the development of the innovation prospectus, and to approve the approach of engagement with the market to support innovation as part of the wider GCP programme. Thank you, Chair.
Very much, Dan. Could I have, it's Claire.
I fully support this, having been part of the SMART programme. Anything I can do to help. I'm amazed that you can do it for 5K. That sounds very ambitious. But good work, and we should be opening up in this way. It is a communication route that will do us some good as well.
Katie, Helen, me.
Yes, I'm on the working group, and I'm just continually amazed how much you've managed to do with such a small group of people. I think basically the whole of the GCP funding could go into technology and communications, but we've got this small working group, and it's amazing what you're doing. Thank you.
Katie, Helen.
I'm on the working group too. I'm assuming that we would see this in kind of draft form. I'm supportive of the approach. And I guess my question is there a model? I think you do refer to one or two other places that have done something similar, but is there a kind of model that we could look at that would be similar to where we think we would end up, or is this going to be very Cambridge specific?
So the only other area that we've seen actually taking this approach is TfL in London. So they do put out challenges to the market, invite companies to come in and help them solve those issues. So this will be very much like their model, and I'm happy to kind of share a link through to the page on the TfL website which sets out their approach.
We'll take them in clutches, so ask Neil and then Christopher.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I can see the positive benefits. This is something very Cambridge in a way with the spin-offs and bits and pieces. I want to add a word of caution. I see red flags when we talk about inward investment, market and feedback and these sort of things in the pub at the moment. As public sector services become ever more patchy, scaffolded over by more and more expensive private profit-making entities. This is use of public money here, and in the end, our real economy becomes ever more expensive environment to operate in, and this goes against productivity as a whole. And I'm not saying that this is a takeover by the market economy, but there is, I think, we do need to realize that this is public money and we are doing things for the public good, and getting too much into bed with private sector, there are definite worries there as well.
Thank you. Christopher?
I should start by speaking on behalf of those not in this work group, but strongly in support. It's achieving a great deal. There are obviously more to be done, and I think that's, we need to press on and see what else we can achieve. So thank you and well done.
Thanks, Christopher. Simon?
This is an excellent report, and thank you, and I wholly support everything that's in this. If we can bring innovation from the private sector to create public value, then I don't think we should be concerned by that. I think we should be encouraging it.
I'll put something of a response to Neil, because I understand what you're saying. Actually, a lot of the public sector does use this sort of method. So it's widely used by the armed forces, it's used by GCHQ, it's used by a lot of the bigger organisations who do actually put out calls for solutions.
Yes, I mean, my own reaction to that was similar, that, I mean, this is a process that, as I understand it, which is about eliciting from the private sector things that do work for the public good, and to do that in an effective and efficient way that doesn't waste your time on a lot of dead ends. But do you have other comments, Dan?
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is all about aligning private sector efforts with what we're trying to achieve and being collaborative with the private sector.
Thanks very much. Sorry, Heather?
Not wishing to repeat what I've said, but I think just a general viewpoint that whether it's from private sector or it's public sector, if it's a good idea, it's a good idea. And I think that's the approach that we take. So long as our money is being used for local benefit, which it is, and we can see that actually the budget on this is quite small compared to everything else. I could understand your concerns if we were to be making investments and funding things that are going to be used in the private sector, but that's not what's happening here. And if someone in the private sector or public sector has a good idea that's going to benefit our residents, then I don't see any harm. A good idea is a good idea, regardless of where it's come from.
Very much. I see no more contributors, so I think that's the end of our discussion on this, and I think that from the contributions made that we would be supporting what you are intending to take to the board, and success with that. I mean, I think that's the bottom line. I mean, we've obviously had a bit of another discussion as well, but I think that's the collective view. Thank you very much. Thank you. We finished the item. Sorry.
Chair, could we propose a comfort break?
Yes. Okay. It was on my agenda after 2 hours. Yes. So we've got one item. We've got one item to come back to. So let's take 5 minutes, if that's okay. Thanks. Okay, we're going to restart. Thank you for suggesting the break. It's much needed. But we have the one item to go, and that is the quarterly progress report. And I'm going to ask Niamh to present that, and then I'll talk about how we structure the discussion.
Thank you, Chair. Just to raise a couple of points, because I suspect you may wish to run through each section in order anyway, but just kind of ahead of that, I think a couple of things, particularly because this is unique in that the sole thing we're asking you to comment on, aside from the progress across the programme, is to endorse the budget strategy, which I know that most of you have seen before, but and we bring it to you once a year in the cycle that you're probably used to by now. And just in terms of that kind of strategy, I think it's worth saying there's a couple of obvious areas of forecast underspend this year, and you'll see that in the report throughout it. And you know, they are substantively around tricky issues like land and planning. And I think as officers, we've set it out in the report, but we have a plan in place to address those. And I think as a programme of this nature, we are going to continue to encounter issues like that. But we are on it in terms of mitigating where we can. And the budget strategy that you're being asked to endorse, it's prudent in that it's considering those sorts of issues into the next financial year and beyond, actually. So just a general point around that. And the second is different, just on gateway review, and again we mentioned that last time we met. But just to say, there's a lot of work to do on that, on preparing for that. It's set out in a section 3.5. We've got some fairly tight deadlines from our civil service colleagues. We've only just been given those in the last few weeks. We had prepared in advance of those deadlines, and thanks to the team for that, because I think without that we'd be under more pressure, I think, than we are. Although Thomas would tell me we're already under quite a lot of pressure anyway. But just to say, we're getting on with it, and there's lots to do, and we'll continue to be working on that across the next 18 months, and we'll continue to update the Assembly on progress against those milestones. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Niamh. So the one item in this report where the board is going on to take a decision is in relation to the budget, and that is highlighted in 1.2 little a on page 72. And I'm going to suggest that we talk about that first, and then we will scan through the other work streams as we've done in the past, if there are any comments on those. So if I can guide you to page 94, so between pages 94 and 99, you will find the commentary, which is probably the easiest way to discuss it, for the budget, which is actually featured on a spreadsheet at the very back. So are there any contributions in relation to the budget, please? I just wanted to, the point was raised earlier about inflation, and I think that we've already said in relation to cycleways, but the point would relate right across the programme, that the degree that the GCP has to respond to inflation, then we would presumably all want that to be as rational as possible. You've said there is scheduled a review where we would get to look at that in the autumn. Just to ask, is that a bit late, or is that, why is that the right time?
Thanks, Chair. I think there's two sort of substantive reasons. I think the first is the kind of phase of the programme that we're in. So, I think a few years ago, some of these projects were at kind of concept stage, and now we're moving into sort of realistic delivery and design stage. So we're at a more comfortable place in what we think is physically deliverable. So it feels like the right time to therefore, ensure that we're sure that we have the resources to deliver that. I think the second thing that we need to consider now is the discussion and decision that isn't on this agenda, but you'll be talking about making connections again in the summer, and that may, depending on the discussion and the debate and the decision that you and the board finally make, that may well have an impact on what this looks like in the future. So that's the kind of summary.
Thank you. And then I had another more specific question on page 99 about the section 106 position. Yeah. So I read there that the expected funds from section 106 have increased from, it says 86.8 million to 120.9 million. Yeah. But I was a little bit at sea as to what time period, is that in total for the whole of the GCP programme, or is that for 1 year, or is that just where we've got to in a moving picture?
Yeah.
Could you sort of present, to calibrate that in terms of time for us?
That's a really, really good point. So part of the kind of issue about calculating this accurately, and this is why we need to work so closely with our county colleagues, is that these receipts come in at different times depending on the progress of various schemes. What we anticipate is that throughout the length of the city deal, that figure will grow quite significantly, but we cannot be sure yet until future receipts are negotiated by county and substantively by county colleagues. So this is as much as we can be fairly certain about as it stands today, but we expect that figure to increase, and we continue to review that on a monthly basis with the county.
So what that really says is that before there was a GCP, it was zero, and that's sort of a number that has steadily climbed as agreements with developers have been struck.
Now that there's an infrastructure programme to pay for as a result of GCP, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions that people have on the budget?
Just a very small one, 13.16 Greenways looks like a very large amount of money to me. That was the only one I noticed that looked bigger than it should have been, maybe. 8 billion, yeah, looked more than expected.
That's a typo. Apologies. Let me triple check, but I'm fairly sure that should be 8.2 million. Yeah. Apologies. Thanks for picking that up.
Yeah, so if you're on the continent, that probably would be right. You know?
Oh,
yes, but yeah. Okay. So any other points? No? Okay. So I suppose relative to local authority budgets, because this is a capital-dominated process, it doesn't stunningly change from 1 year to the next because things are rolling through the gateway of an annual budget. So it doesn't surprise me totally that there aren't huge number of questions. But I think that means that we have no comments. Can I also say that we support this? I see nods, so I will. Yeah. Right, now the next thing is to go through the other work streams. So I was going to take the transport work stream next, which appears on page 74. 5. That's, 78, is it? Okay, sorry, I'm getting my... Right, oh yes, so page 78 is where the details start. So are there any comments in the pages 78, 79, in fact going through to page 84? Helen?
My comment isn't about that section, it's about the beginning section, where we talk about the gateway review. Is it logical to do that first, given that that's at the beginning?
That was going to be what I called at the end, but...
oh, okay. Which do you want?
Transport now.
Okay.
I'll come back to you. So this is on the transport section, Paul. Yeah. Paul?
Just on the RAG table for transport, I raised at the last assembly that it seemed that both target completion and forecast completion dates were being changed. And I thought there was a kind of agreement that the target completion date shouldn't change from assembly to assembly. But there are still some that are kind of looking back at previous agendas. There are some here where the target completion date has changed. So you can't then see whether there's been a slip in the programme. So I was wondering if we could correct that. I'm happy to kind of point out specifically what those are, if that would help outside of this meeting.
Okay, thanks, Paul. We'll come back to that. Heather?
Is a potential solution to Councillor Bearpark's things is it would be useful to have original time date, revised date, and then where we're at. So that way as well, we can actually see if there has been a revision to the date. So appreciate that would be a third column, but for most things it wouldn't be applicable. But I think that would square this circle perhaps, and would satisfy the frustration in quite a simple fix, because it would be really useful for us to see when the original date was, because equally it may get revised several times. So I think that would be helpful.
See the logic to that? Is that?
Happy to offer that transparency, and we'll sit down with Paul and make sure we've got it out.
It does encourage gaming in that you set that, you're going to put out a completion date that's further ahead than you probably expect it to be. I think what we need to do is basically say to the officers, don't game it, just be honest about it. You're not going to be sacked because you're missing target dates. We understand the complexity of these things and the things that can go wrong. It just gives us visibility about what the barriers are to progress and completion. It's not a test of competence.
I think that's right. All I want to add, though, Simon, is that the person sat in my shoes before me didn't game, and so we've got those dates in. So we're not. There will be no new dates other than when we discussed this last time. The dates will now only change when they come as part of a report, and you the revised dates. So gaming was a possibility, but when the programme started, sadly, in my shoes, it's no longer a possibility for me to do that.
Saying is that this sort of arrangement is completely undermined when people start to game, and we have a fantastic relationship between ourselves. Don't let's introduce that culture into this organisation.
I think that's would be hopefully both officers and members joint consensus. Yes, Katie.
It's a question. On a lot of the diagrams for transportation that we're looking at delivering, there's a Cambridge East station. And I'm really supportive of the Cambridge East station. And I just wondered at what stage we might be actually looking at it as a realistic project to begin to take seriously.
So it's not in our programme. So we are not consciously taking it forward. We're in discussions with county colleagues and city colleagues in the rail industry about it, but it's not an agreed and approved scheme. There's no budget assigned for that, so we wouldn't, unless you took a subsequent decision, include that in our programme and progress it. And at the moment, we have no plans to do that, and maybe that we might reflect on that when we have our prioritisation conversation later in the year.
Could I just inject a question on the progress of the Eastern Access project, which is currently being consulted on. And you and I have spoken about this, Peter, recently, but it would be very helpful to clarify in public, I think, that that consultation still has open for input the location of Park and Ride, the park site, and that because there has been an impression created that that's all sorted, and in reality there are a lot of views out in the public domain, and people need to understand whether or not they can enter their perspective on the appropriate location for the Park and Ride.
Chair, as you say, that consultation is ongoing, and we specifically asked the question for people's views on the location of the Park and Ride.
Anything else on the transport section? Okay, so then we'll go to the skills section, which is the following appendix, which starts on page 85. Are there any questions or points on that? So the next one is the Smart Work stream, which starts on page 89. Any points on that? Helen?
Might be for Dan rather than Neve. It talks about the smart signals and that they're not as good as the signals that were there before. Does that mean they're not smart, or they might be smart with further work? I don't quite understand.
The work's in two phases. The first phase is comparing the technology that we're using against existing technology, which is called Mover. We've had an independent expert come in and assess both of them together, and actually they perform at about the same level. Where we think we're really going to see gains is where we have a number of junctions that all work together, and that's the second phase that we're moving into now. So we'll have 3 junctions, the end of Brooklands Avenue on Hills Road, and 2 other junctions on Hills Road, so one up near Cherry Hinton Road. That testing will be over the next year, and we'll see whether we gain advantage by using this technology over the existing technology there.
Thank you. Simon?
If you recall, the Assembly recommended to the Executive Board that which road it is, Sedley Taylor Road, be closed. And one of the elements of the decision making was that there was going to be this smart technology applied to that junction to increase the flow of traffic. Is that junction included in this next round as part of this smart technology?
This is the Hills Road, Long Road junction. Yeah?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So that's again into the...
Yeah, sure. So it's not, so the first junction was the Robin Hood junction, and then the next 3 junctions are Cherry Hinton Hills Road, Brooklands Avenue Hills Road, and there is another junction in the middle of there that but what I can do is I can confirm the 3 and I can circulate that for you.
I think also possibly the suggestion behind that is we've given you a 4th.
Okay, we can have a look at that. We'll have a look at that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Artwork stream. We then come to the housing one, which is on page 92. Nothing there. And then the economy and environment one, which is on page 94. Nothing there. So, Helen, I said I was going to have the opportunity on the general items not covered in those sections. So, can I come back to you for the point you wanted, and then Christopher?
Yeah, you talk right in the beginning about the Gateway review and I think some delays and some change to the role of its SQW. It's all a bit coded for those of us on the outside, so I don't know whether any of this is threatening or problematic in any way, but a little bit of explanation would be quite helpful.
possibly slightly connected to that. We tend to spend a lot of our time focused on what we're doing in our area and measuring ourselves against our own targets. The gateway, of course, is how Whitehall looks at us and depends on how they're thinking about things. I don't know whether at this stage you can give us, it might be an unfair question, so you might choose not to answer it, any sense as to whether we feel comfortable with what they're looking for in the gateway. You've talked about a lot of work needs to be done to fill in the right boxes and the right forms to get it submitted, but are we looking at it thinking we are doing the things that they will think are important to unlock the final tranche, or not? So it's almost red, amber, green on that. So do we think we're there if we can get it written up properly or not?
Okay, I see no more hands, so questions from Helen and Christopher.
Yep, sure. Helen, your question accepts the slight confusion. So the first time we did this, each area of the country, each devolved area was required by government to appoint an independent set of consultants to answer the, well, actually to set the exam question really and to answer it. In our area and in many others, we use SQW. This time round, the government have appointed SQW to work across each area, if that makes sense. So they are directly appointed by government, but they are working in a very similar way to the way they were working for us in phase 1. Does that add up? So, I mean, I think that government colleagues had hoped to be able to release the detail about what they were going to ask us for various reports and deadlines well before they did in the autumn. I mean, and we'll work within those timeframes. I think it just was what it was. That's what we've kind of picked up from colleagues. To Christopher's point, I think I would say this, but yes, we're ready, and it's going to be a hard 18 months preparing various documents and the various level of assessment and monitoring evaluation that we know that government want, but we now know what they want. We know we've got a good set of consultants supporting us, and we're likely to need some more consultancy support, which this Assembly and Board considered last time we met. But I think we're in a strong position. We speak with other areas around their kind of progress, and we know that we're in a similar boat, and some of the challenges that they're facing, say, around inflation, are national issues. So, yes, we're going confidently.
Simon, go on.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you do this to me, applying transport scrutiny, so...
What?
Well, I just want to make a general comment about continuity GCP. And I've mentioned this a number of times before. But the point is that the success of Greater Cambridge is not going to stop in 2030, and nor are the pressures for future development and success of our technology industries, and the infrastructure requirements will continue. And if you reflect back on the antecedents to the GCP, there was a very, very long run-in to 2014 when the City deal was put together. And it's a 15-year programme. And we're only 7 years away from 2030. And my experience is that you need a very, very long lead-in time to be able to launch a programme for 2030 to 2045. And a lot of that is about socialisation of the idea, both within the Greater Cambridge, for all the stakeholders, and with the government itself. And we will have a new government in 2025, and they will maybe have very similar ambitions as the current government for economic development and sustainability of the area. So I think at some point, and I know you're incredibly busy and overloaded, we do need to be having some thought about what might happen after 2030. We're going to need you.
Simon, as I said, when you raised this last time, I suspect this isn't the right time to have that debate, but it's good flag to wave. I can confirm that it was within 3 years that we negotiated the current City deal. think that the main leverage that we had at the start of that was what was emerging as the new local plan, which obviously got adopted a whole lot later than that for reasons we don't need to go into. But I suspect that when we've got a bit further with the preparation of the following local plan, then probably that would be basis to open up a discussion, wouldn't it? Because I think it was clear that from the government's point of view, they wanted to see where we were coming from with plans that we made ourselves in order for us to be able to ask for help with those. And I suspect that would remain the way of operating for government, colour it was. So, but yeah, it sounds like something that should be put on the radar screen for consideration at an appropriate time.
Chair, I think in Rachel's absence, we should give that to Rachel.
Yeah, it sounds like that's a good job for when Rachel comes back from her holiday. Whether it's this holiday or next holiday, I don't know. Okay, so I don't see any other hands, and I think we've exhausted contributions on this. To the quarterly progress report, I think we are saying that we support the budget submission that's going to the board, that we, on a much smaller scale, we've suggested an improvement to the way progress targets are recorded on the transport projects. And I think that's about it, really. So let's finish now. And thank you very much for your contributions, everyone, Niamh and Peter particularly. And we've got a next meeting on Thursday, the 8th of June, in our diaries, hopefully, at 2 o'clock. So until then, seems a long time, but a lot of work will need to go on between now and then. So thank you very much. And good afternoon.